Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading some articles out of History magazine. And as you can see by the title, we're going to read about famous temples of history, temples that no longer exist, at least as they once were. Right? We're going to be starting with Hatshepsut's temple. We can see her here. Female pharaoh. We're also going to read about the Temple of Jerusalem and Templo Mayor in what's now Mexico City. Just some quick notes as my neighbor stomps above us. First of all, don't worry about the Jerusalem article. It's nothing to do with the current conflict. It has to do with the temple from its conception to the building of the Dome on the Rock. So nothing to do with modern 20th or 21st century anything in that area. Just the history of the temple, so don't worry. Second, this article about Templo Mayor goes into some pretty graphic details about what happened there. So I am going to whisper this article to try to make it a little bit more relaxing and, I don't know, maybe say the graphic parts very softly so that the algorithm doesn't get too upset, I guess. Third, some of these articles were chosen by my channel members. They were chosen by Krista and Crystal. So thank you very much. If you would like to pick future history magazine articles, you can click the join button right down there, become a channel member, or if you're on mobile and it's not there, you can click the very first link in the description box and it'll take you to the channel membership page. Channel memberships are only 99 US cents per month, the lowest it can possibly be, and you get all kinds of perks, History magazine being one of them. So with that being said, let's get into it, starting with Hatshepsut. Temple of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt, first as co-regent and then as pharaoh, for a total of 21 years. She was one of the few women in Egyptian history to retain power for so long. She reigned during one of ancient Egypt's golden ages, when Egypt was awash with wealth. Hatshepsut built monumental works all over the nation, a myriad of temples and shrines, 4 giant obelisks at the Temple of Amun and Karnak, and countless artworks celebrating her accomplishments and immortalizing her prayers. But many of these works were defaced and destroyed after her death in 1458 BCE. Hatshepsut's successor, Thutmose III, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, led the charge to erase her name from history. Her likeness was chiseled away from monuments, and her statues and works destroyed. Nevertheless, following a major 20th century reconstruction, Hatshepsut's massive temple at Deir el-Bahari, which is Arabic for northern monastery, still stands today, sheltered beneath the red rocks of a cliff face. This architectural wonder captivated the ancient world with its beauty and is a testament to Hatshepsut's glory and her devotion to the gods. Woman who would be king. Hatshepsut was born around 1507 BCE to Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Queen Ahmose. Hatshepsut would marry her half-brother and heir to the throne, Thutmose II, becoming his great royal wife. Thutmose II died young, leaving behind a 2-year-old son, born to a secondary wife, as his heir. The child was too young to rule, so Hatshepsut, the boy's aunt and stepmother, ruled for him. Hatshepsut gradually transformed her role from queen regent to outright pharaoh. When Thutmose III was older, he became her second in command, but he would not rule outright as pharaoh until her death around 1458 BCE. His reign would be glorious, filled with triumphs all his own. But while he ruled, a systematic campaign attempted to erase Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Millennia later, archaeologists would put the pieces back together to restore Hatshepsut's place in history. Million-year temples. In the New Kingdom period, Hatshepsut was one of the first pharaohs who built the so-called temples of millions of years on the western bank of the Nile, opposite the city of Thebes, which is modern-day Luxor. 5 centuries earlier, in Middle Kingdom times, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II had erected the first mortuary temple here. Perhaps inspired by Mentuhotep, Hatshepsut installed her massive complex at the foot of a cliff, a site now known as Deir el-Bahri. The second location has been consecrated to the goddess Hathor, protector of the dead and an important funerary deity in Thebes. In these temples, pharaohs would be worshipped after their deaths. Their mummies, meanwhile, rested elsewhere, entombed in private underground chambers in the Valley of the Kings. As well as being used for royal funerals, the temples of millions of years were the focus for other rituals, some related to royalty, others to deities, including the Theban god Amun and the sun god Ra. Of all the mortuary temples, Hatshepsut's would become the main cult structure of the Theban complex. Construction lasted some 15 years and was carried out under the supervision of Senenmut, a high official and favorite of the pharaoh. The imposing building incorporated ramps and courtyards like the nearby Mentuhotep temple, but Senenmut introduced a number of innovations to create a building of unequaled magnificence. It came to be known as Djeser Djeseru, Holy of Holies. Most New Kingdom commemorative temples featured chambers separated by monumental gateways or pylons, like those that can still be seen at Luxor and Karnak. Hatshepsut's temple, on the other hand, was arranged around a central ramp or causeway. Spread along this causeway at different heights were 3 large courtyards. Today, the walls and courtyards of Hatshepsut's temple might look somewhat plain. In her time, they would have been filled with vibrant color, surrounded by lush gardens and pools, and richly decorated with sculpture and reliefs. Each decorative element conveyed a religious or political message, in keeping with the ceremonial use of the building. Sacred alignments. The layout of Hatshepsut's temple was carefully designed. Most obviously, it was positioned to align perfectly with the Temple of Amun at Karnak, on the opposite bank of the Nile. In addition, the precise east-west alignment of its central causeway mirrored the daily path of the sun, or, according to the beliefs of the day, the path of the god Ra. The temple was also aligned with the Valley of the Kings, which lies to the west. This royal necropolis has been inaugurated by Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I. In fact, tomb KV20, the burial place of Hatshepsut and Thutmose I, lies in a straight line from the sanctuary of Amun, the innermost chamber of Hatshepsut's temple. Some experts have suggested that the original plan was to connect KV20 with the sanctuary of Amun via a tunnel through the interposing cliff, but the poor quality of the rock prevented it. Stone balustrades flank the central ramp, guarded by imposing stone lions. A colonnade separates the first and second courtyards. To highlight Hatshepsut's piety and devotion, reliefs depict 2 massive obelisks on the way to the Temple of Amun at Karnak. Around the second courtyard are famous reliefs showing a trading expedition that Hatshepsut sent to the land of Punt, believed to be located on the Horn of Africa. Myrrh trees were brought back from this expedition and planted in the temple complex. Their resin would later be used in temple rituals. Other reliefs represent the divine birth of Hatshepsut, who, according to tradition, had been begotten by the god Amun-Ra during a visit he made to Ahmose, the wife of Thutmose I. Her divine origin was an important tool in legitimizing Hatshepsut's rule over Egypt. In the second courtyard, there are also two sanctuaries, one dedicated to Hathor and the other to Anubis, a funerary god. Okay, there we go. 24 colossal Osirides, statues of Pharaoh Hatshepsut as Osiris, god of the afterlife, flanked the entrance to the third courtyard. She wears a false beard, known as a postiche, and the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, or the Peshent, as she holds the symbols of royalty. This uppermost courtyard had sanctuaries dedicated to the royal cult, to the solar god, Re-Horakti, and to Anubis. In the central part of this last courtyard stood the temple's innermost chambers, a sanctuary dedicated to Amun-Ra. Inside were 3 adjoining chambers decorated with scenes of Hatshepsut and the god Amun. The sanctuary of Amun-Ra was the main setting for a ceremony that was celebrated every year in Thebes, the beautiful festival of the valley. The celebration dates back to the Middle Kingdom and reached new heights in Hatshepsut's time. Badly deteriorated reliefs that run along the upper courtyard of Hatshepsut's temple depict the festivities. During the second month of the harvest season, or Shemu, in the early summer, the pharaoh would lead a procession bearing the image of Amun, followed by a retinue of nobles, priests, dancers, and soldiers. They would begin at Karnak Temple, cross the Nile, and visit the mortuary temples. After her death, Hatshepsut was intentionally consigned to oblivion by Thutmose III. He ordered the demolition of all statues, monuments, and representations of her, including depictions of her on her temple. Yet the building remained on the western bank of the Nile. Each year it still hosted the most dazzling festival of the Theban necropolis, standing strong through the millennia, a lasting testament to the pharaoh who built it. Let's quickly look at the picture so this doesn't go too long, because the other articles are very long. You can see some of the statues here, carved into the rock. Statue here of a goddess. There you go. Depiction here of Punt, which is one of the many mysteries of Egypt where Punt was. We're pretty sure we have an idea, but we don't know for sure. This is talking about, I think that ceremony they're talking about, showing all the different scenes. Maybe it's just the boats and soldiers, I'm not sure. I didn't read the blurb. Here's the temple from above. Isn't that incredible? Along this colonnade spreads out to the temple here. Some of the more colorful works inside. And this says this is Thutmose II steering Amun's boat. I love this photo. Here's how it looks today against the rock here. The big temple, you can see the colonnade here, the procession area going up. So beautiful. Let's see. I guess this was the plan, to create like a long pathway to the Nile and to Thebes. I almost said Luxor. Then it was Thebes, right? We have Hatshepsut's sarcophagus. And there's a little statue there of Senenmut, the architect. one of the few images we have of Hatshepsut there on a sphinx. And a more detailed look at what the temple would have looked like during its prime there. Down here is Thutmose III. And then the first picture we have is this incredible aerial shot of the temple today. Isn't that amazing? So this is very near the Valley of the Kings. So one of the many sites you can go see if you visit Central Egypt today. Let's move on to the Temple of Jerusalem. Here we go. In the first book of Kings, King Solomon stands before the people of Israel to dedicate a temple in honor of their God Yahweh. The king reminds them that he has fulfilled the promise Yahweh has made to Solomon's father, King David. But the Lord said to my father David, "You did well to consider building a house for my name. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, who shall be born to you, shall build the house for my name." The Bible describes how Solomon's temple is meant to replace the tabernacle, a tent-like structure that housed the Ark of the Covenant and other vessels. The Book of Kings details the construction down to the dimensions of different chambers and structures. Measuring about 120 feet long and 55 feet wide, the Temple of Jerusalem took 7 years to complete. Scholars have established that a temple to Yahweh did exist in Jerusalem during the Iron Age, which was approximately the 12th to 6th centuries BCE. According to the Bible, Solomon ruled in the 10th century BCE, but there is no archaeological evidence corroborating that the temple's construction took place during that period. It would have been in the interests of the Hebrew Scriptures' authors to attribute the building of this first temple to King Solomon, as the reigns of Solomon and his father David are depicted in the Bible as a golden era. The idea that King Solomon sponsored the first temple bolsters this narrative and connects its construction to the concept of a unified Israel. Centralization. The archaeological and historical picture becomes clearer in the time of Josiah, king of Judah. At this time, according to the Bible, the realm of Solomon had split into 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem belonged to Judah. King Josiah commissioned major reforms to the existing temple, which had become far more significant in religious life. In 2 Kings 22, Josiah sends the high priest Hilkiah, I'm not sure, to the temple to count the entire sum of the money that has been brought into the house of the Lord. The priest discovers a book of the law inside the temple and shows it to the king. After he reads it, Josiah decrees that the temple would be the one and only place of worship to Yahweh. Authorized copies of the book of the law would be kept inside the temple. Through his reforms, King Josiah effectively centralized power in Jerusalem with the temple at its heart. That first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians when they conquered Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE. During the period of Persian rule and after Alexander the Great's conquest, the temple complex was slowly rebuilt. Around 515 BCE, the second temple was dedicated in Jerusalem. Several centuries later, Herod the Great, king of Judea, made important renovations and expansions to the structure. Judea was a vassal province of Rome. Under Herod, the temple became a building of impressive dimensions. The famous Western Wall, still visible today, gives an idea of the scale of the temple precinct. The temple sat at the very heart of Yahweh worship. The main element of worship was ritual animal sacrifice. These ceremonies took place there twice a day, and all Jews symbolically participated by paying half a shekel to the temple annually. Other acts of worship took place in the temple too, such as the reading of hymns and psalms, and the congregation receiving blessings from the priests. The tablets bearing the law that Yahweh had delivered to Moses were kept in the temple inside a cabinet known as the Ark of the Covenant. This cabinet was stored inside the Holy of Holies, the most sacred place in the temple. The high priest was the only person allowed to enter the Holy of Holies, and then only once a year on the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. After the fall, a series of Jewish revolts against Rome began around 66 CE. In the course of putting them down, the Romans razed Jerusalem and destroyed the Second Temple. The temple's treasures were looted and taken to Rome. The loss marked a radical change in the evolution of Judaism. When the Romans destroyed the temple and dispersed the Sadducees, I'm not sure what that is, the priestly class that had governed it, the Jews lost the main element that had united them. It was then that the Pharisees took charge of the faith. The Pharisees were a Jewish group who focused on the study of the law as found in the Torah, which are the biblical books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and applied its teachings to daily life. Faced with the challenge of the disappearance of the temple and the competition posed by nascent Christianity, the Pharisees convened the Synod of Jamnia, a liturgical meeting held in what is today Yafne, Israel. Here they established a liturgy of prayers to take the place of sacrifice and worship at the temple, which were now impossible. The council also determined the canon of writings that would be added to the original 5 books of the Torah to become the Hebrew Bible. Emphasis of worship shifted from the location of the temple to the reading of the text. From this point on, the Torah would be the focus. The new liturgy of prayers established by the Synod would be celebrated in community synagogues. Before the destruction of the temple, synagogues had existed as study centers, but now their role began to expand. Jews from any community, wherever it was located in the diaspora, could celebrate the new liturgy simply by designating a place to serve as a synagogue. Some elements of the ancient cults in the temple were transposed symbolically in the organization of the liturgy. For example, the main obligatory prayer, the Amidah, or Shemona Esra, included the blessing given by the priests in the temple. The liturgical services that are still celebrated in the synagogue in the morning, I'm not going to try to say the Hebrew words, in the morning and the afternoon, symbolize the 2 daily sacrifices that used to be celebrated in the temple. The memory of the temple also led many congregations to build synagogues, so that the wall bearing the cabinet where the Torah was kept was oriented toward Jerusalem. Likewise, during Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, there are 2 liturgical elements that directly relate to the temple. The first is the blowing of the shofar, or ram's horn. The shofar is also blown for Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, a few days before. The second is a service at the end of the ceremony, which is called Neilat She'arim, or the closing of doors. The act echoes the solemn moment when the doors of the temple were closed at the end of Yom Kippur. A faith transformed. It was in the Torah that the symbolic force and sanctity of the temple were most vividly maintained. Those responsible for this were the rabbis, who elevated the Torah and its study above all else. After the temple's destruction, the Torah took its place as the focus of Jewish life. In doing so, Judaism was liberated from depending on a single geographical location, instead focusing on a tangible object that could be present in every Jewish community all over the world. Through the Torah, it was possible to galvanize the feeling of belonging among scattered communities, especially between the 3rd and 5th centuries BCE, when new Jewish communities arose in places as far apart as Yemen and the Iberian Peninsula. These communities needed common ties that would unite them with their brethren in the more important Jewish centers of Palestine and Babylon. The reading of the Torah is still at the heart of the Jewish liturgy celebrated every Saturday or Shabbat. Reading aloud from the Torah is the most important moment of the liturgical service. The Torah scroll is removed from the Torah ark and carried in procession to the dais, or bima, where the corresponding Torah portion, I'm just going to give up on the Hebrew, where the corresponding Torah portion is read aloud. The Torah is divided up in such a way that it is read in its entirety every year. To emphasize the sanctity of the Torah, the scroll from which it is read should never be touched directly. This is why it has a handle at each end of the scroll. The reader uses a pointer called a yod instead of their own finger to guide them as they read. In the synagogue, the Torah is still read from a scroll rather than a book, to recall how it appeared in ancient times in the Temple. After the 10th century, the Torah and the other sacred texts were also copied in codex format, as these codices were used for study rather than in the liturgy. They could incorporate elements that were prohibited in the Torah scrolls, such as illuminations. 3 faiths in Jerusalem. After the Romans destroyed the Second Temple complex, the site lay in ruins for centuries. The area continued to hold great meaning in Judaism, but the temple also occupies a significant place in both Christianity and Islam. Passages in the canonical Gospels and the apocryphal Gospels describe episodes from the life of Jesus that took place at the temple in Jerusalem. Shortly after his birth, Jesus is presented at the temple, and later, while still a child, Jesus spends time in the temple debating with teachers of Jewish law. As an adult, Jesus cleansed the temple, driving out merchants and money changers from the sacred precinct. In the Quran, as in the Bible, Solomon is portrayed as the builder of the temple and a figure of immense wisdom. The Quran includes the story of Muhammad's miraculous night journey from Mecca to the farther place of worship, or Masjid al-Aqsa, which Muslim tradition identified as the Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, identified as the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. In this account, Muhammad is said to have traveled there in one night, prayed with prophets, and briefly ascended to heaven and prayed with Ibrahim, Musa, or Moses, and Isa, or Jesus. When Muslim forces took control of Jerusalem in the 7th century CE, only ruins remained where the Second Temple once stood. The city's new rulers established their own place of worship where the Second Temple had been. They built the Dome of the Rock, the 3rd most sacred site in Islam next to Mecca and Medina, on Temple Mount. Later, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built nearby. Jerusalem is a city of great importance to all 3 faiths. According to tradition, Abraham, David, Solomon, Jesus, and Muhammad all walked here, building up their followings and strengthening their faiths. Controlling Jerusalem and the Temple Mount has been at the center of violent conflicts during and since the Middle Ages because of the site's shared significance. Today, a respectful yet sometimes uneasy truce remains in place among the 3. there are those who pray to rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem one day. They believe that the construction of a third temple will coincide with or bring about the arrival of the Messiah. But there are others who have embraced the temple's role as a symbol of sanctity, wisdom, and faith. All right, let's take a look at the pictures in this article. Lastly, over here we have what the temple might have looked like based on descriptions from other works of art from 1500. That's by Botticelli, it says, depicting the temple. From 1230, this is by the temple. Doesn't say who painted this. Maybe it does. Anyway, a Muslim depiction there. 1411, Gothic style. Looks like a little church, like a little chapel. And down here in 1626, this is an engraving by Matthäus Miriam the Elder. But a much more grandiose depiction. They kind of put all those together to create this drawing of what it probably looked like. This is the Dome of the Rock. Beautiful, beautiful complex here, which the rock is inside here, the rock that Muhammad ascended to heaven on. There's a Torah here, and this is an illumination of Solomon. Illumination's basically a little illustration in a religious text. Vessels of the Book. This is another, I guess, drawing that's in an Sephardic Bible, it says here. And this points out what all the little symbols mean in Judaism. The tabernacle, what used to be where the temple was, with all the artifacts here. There's a rabbi here holding the Torah. Oh, and here's a shofar. Big horn that they blow. This is the western wall today, what's left of the sacred temple. And Jewish people come here to pray and leave prayers between the rocks here. This is a coin that shows the second temple. And a biblical scene depicted here of Solomon making a sacrifice. More details here about Solomon's temple. Various sacred chambers, and there's the Holy of Holies. Another depiction of the Holy of Holies. There's the Ark of the Covenant. It looks like here, under construction, there's King Solomon approving the work there. And then another beautiful artwork here. Does it say who painted this? It doesn't say. Wait, does it? David Roberts. Okay, in 1848. The Romans coming to destroy Jerusalem. Here we go. Let's read about our last temple of the night, which again I'm going to start whispering because it's really quite graphic. And it is Templo Mayor. Just like I probably mispronounced some Hebrew, I'm probably going to mispronounce some Nahuatl, so forgive me. Here we go. For centuries, archaeologists searched in vain for Templo Mayor, which they knew existed somewhere beneath modern-day Mexico City. Once rising some 160 feet above the Aztec, or Mexica, as the Aztec referred to themselves, ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan, the ancient capital of the Aztec Empire. The pyramid served as the religious focal point, and some say the center of the Aztec universe. But then Hernan Cortez, head of a joint force of Spanish troops and hundreds of thousands of indigenous allies, conquered the city in 1521, badly damaging the pyramid. Over time it gradually disappeared. Maps and chronicles indicated that Templo Mayor lay beneath Mexico City Metropolitan Cathedral. Once in a while, when work was
the city's subsoil, objects related to Templo Mayor would appear. In 1790, a large statue of the goddess Coatlicue and a 24-ton monolith called the Sunstone or Aztec calendar were found. In 1914, an archaeologist unearthed more remains that he linked to Templo Mayor. A breakthrough came in 1978 when, in the course of some underground cabling work, electricity company workers made the chance discovery of an 11-foot wide monolith depicting Coyolxauhqui. In Aztec mythology, she is the goddess of the moon and sister of Huitzilopochtli, the sun, to whom the Templo Mayor was dedicated. Shockingly, the goddess was portrayed as decapitated and dismembered. Archaeologists were riveted by the find and wanted to know more. An excavation team overseen by archaeologist Eduardo Matos Moctezuma was immediately launched. What emerged from these diggings was the Templo Mayor, a huge temple pyramid that had served as the sacred center of the Aztec Empire, writes archaeologist Michael E. Smith in The Aztecs. Over the past 45 years, the team's painstaking work has brought to light some of the most breathtaking Aztec artifacts ever found, and with them came startling insights into major aspects of Aztec religion, life, and society. Power and might. The original Templo Mayor was a simple thatched shrine built during the reign of Itzcoatl. Subsequent leaders ordered its enlargement to commemorate their military victories, or sometimes as the result of flooding or other environmental problems. Excavations have confirmed at least 7 expansions. It may be surprising that they preferred to enlarge the old temple instead of building a new one, but there is a reason that has to do with the special significance of the site itself. According to myth, the god Huitzilopochtli led the Aztec or Mexica on their march from their mythical homeland of Aztlan to Lake Texcoco. There, he showed the priests a small island where an eagle was perched on a nopal cactus called Tenochtli in Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica. The land was little more than a swamp, but these hardy new inhabitants, almost totally uncultured, yet possessing an indomitable will, according to renowned scholar Miguel León Portilla, founded Tenochtitlan and built there the embryo of the Templo Mayor. It took the labor of thousands of people over many years to construct this magnificent temple. The workers included not only the city's inhabitants, but also laborers from other towns that were dominated by the Aztec. These subjects were forced to work on government projects as part of their tribute to the empire. The Aztec also required them to provide building materials. Refusal to collaborate could trigger a war, with the resulting taking and sacrificing of prisoners. Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan thus became a demonstration of the power of the Aztec rulers over the surrounding peoples. No doubt the site was magnificent. Templo Mayor, or Nahuatl, it's pronounced like that. Let me try. Huitzilopochtli stood in the eastern part of the ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan. There were 78 buildings in this area, including temples, priestly residences, altars, a ball game court, and Zompansless racks on which human skulls were displayed. At its peak, Templo Mayor's final iteration was a truncated pyramid resting on a 4-tiered platform. Twin staircases accessed to smaller temples atop the pyramid, each dedicated to the city's main gods, Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli. The Coyolxauhqui monolith was found at the base of the stairs leading to the latter temple. square platform on which the temple stood was the horizontal plane where all living beings existed, while the pyramid represented the celestial level, and below it was the underworld. Templo Mayor was a tangible display of life and death, beginning and end. Even the two temples that crowned it reflected this symbolism. Tlaloc, as an aquatic divinity, represented life and sustenance for agricultural people, such as the Aztec, while Huitzilopochtli was the god of war and death, sunset and sunrise. The temple also commemorated the victory of Huitzilopochtli over his innumerable brothers, who, according to the myth, had conspired against him and paid for it with their lives. His sister Koyo Hauki also rebelled, and Huitzilopochtli killed her by throwing her from the summit of Mount Coatepec. A monolith representing the goddess's death was placed at the foot of the staircase leading to Templo Mayor. Alright, rites and rituals, here we go. As the most important temple, Templo Mayor hosted the main ceremonies of Aztec society, from the coronations of new monarchs to varied rituals related to agriculture, rain, and the proper functioning of the heavenly bodies. The ceremonies were spread throughout the ritual calendar according to the importance of the divinity in the Aztec pantheon. Many of the human sacrifices took place as parts of these monthly celebrations, Smith writes. Each year, hundreds or perhaps thousands of victims had their chests cut open and their still beating hearts ripped out by knife-wielding priests as throngs of spectators looked on. The most solemn events were reserved for the most important god, Huitzilopochtli. On these days, people were executed on a stone in front of Huitzilopochtli's temple. Their hearts were then placed on a beautiful polychrome jacmul, a reclining figure sculpted in stone in front of the temple of Tlaloc. The Aztec believed human sacrifices were necessary in their religious rituals to placate the sun god. Through these sacrifices, they repeated the deaths of the gods who sacrificed themselves in the sacred hearth of Teotihuacan, so that men could live, feeding the movement of the sun with their blood. They believed the sacred deaths ensured the continuity of life on earth, while reminding those who opposed the Aztec that they could die on the bloody altar of the Templo Mayor. Most victims were enemy warriors captured in battle, Smith writes. Astonished by the city's finely planned grandeur, they spared no praise in describing it. But it's the imposing Templo Mayor that caught their eye. Cortez himself noted in his second letter of relation that in spite of the large number of temples in the city, there is one, the main one, whose greatness and features no human tongue can describe. During the subsequent siege of Tenochtitlan, Templo Mayor was badly damaged by the cannon the Spanish used to subdue the city. After the fall of the Aztec capital, the building was not immediately demolished. Sources confirm it was still standing as late as 1524. With the passage of time, all traces of the ancient Aztec place of worship disappeared. Workers of the New Mexico City used materials from pre-existing buildings. So little by little, the stones from temples and other buildings in the ancient Aztec ceremonial center, including a Templo Mayor, were taken and used to build 68 churches within the former boundaries of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco. They were also used in the countless houses and structures erected in the city center. Since 1978, archaeological excavations of the ancient temple have revealed more and more of the grandeur that was Templo Mayor. They found palace rooms, built-in baths, the House of the Eagles, which was the meeting place of the military elite, a school for priests, and sculptures of snakes and serpents. Is there a difference between snakes and serpents? An excavation work as excavation work continues, a big mystery remains. Historical records state that the remains of 3 Aztec kings were cremated and their ashes buried at the foot of Templo Mayor, and yet no emperor's remains have been found. Chief archaeologist Leonardo Lopez Lujan believes their discoveries will point to Ahuitzotl's burial place. We're persuaded that sooner or later we'll find his tomb, he says. We're digging deeper and deeper. If and when they do succeed in finding the tomb, it will be the culmination of decades of work that have shed light on one of the world's most legendary and misunderstood empires. Let me just make sure there isn't anything extra. I don't think there is. No, there isn't. Okay. So there's a graphic depiction of the things I had to very softly whisper, and the wall of skulls. Yikes. There's a knife that they used. I mean, it's very pretty, right? But my goodness. There's the big guy himself, Huitzilopochtli. What's up here? An altar. My goodness. Divine offerings, showing where offerings were buried. Here it looks like a stone depiction there, maybe on the top here. There's some of the remains of the temple here. It's slowly digging out what they can. There's a big serpent here. There's the eagle eating the snake on the cactus in the swamp. And a really beautiful artifact here. That's Tlaloc, the god of rain. And here's the container, the chalk mule, that I had to very softly whisper about because holy moly, yikes. And here's another god that they found. I'm not going to try to say that name. A more detailed look at the layers that we have uncovered, or not we, archaeologists have uncovered, and most likely what it looked like. You can see the 2 temples there. There's the goddess statue of her being all chopped up, right? And it looks like this beautiful artwork here is being preserved. You know, they don't want nobody touching that. The monoliths of Koyoki. Yeah, all chopped up. You can see her feet, there's her hands. And there it is in more detail. You can imagine just coming across this